He mentally adjusted his perception overlay in the hopes that none of them had observed. "Why don't we all relax?" he proposed, placatingly lifting his hands. "We can resolve this. You believe that we want your harsh earth stimulants to be mocked at, yet we insist on greetings from the world of science fiction, where fantastical stories come to life. Take pleasure in the Judicial Complex 7's clean, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as you traveled." Aiden Kai's slumped as harsh shadows were projected across the crystalline chamber. He was checking his messages on a holographic display while holding a coffee cup in his right hand inside his leather jacket. Coming from his wrist, he had been called here on some official, most likely another penalty for illegal encryption procedures moving forward. 2187B will now start to be announced. Aiden looked up and noticed that AI's voice was reverberating through the room with fake seriousness. 3 women sitting behind a clear barrier for the first time weren't human. Their skin tones ranged, and their silver hair gleamed in the sunlight like liquid mercury. Even at this distance, the color changes from deep sapphire blue to several degrees of violet. They were a pale, slender man in elaborate clothing, and their otherworldly beauty was evident. Aiden recognized Robo as he stood close by, nibbling anxiously at his thumbnail. What the devil was the Shiani system's diplomatic representative, the consul? At his misdemeanor hearing, a senior foreign diplomat was acting in accordance with tone, the AI judge's Earth in paragraph 9.4.7 of the Interplanetary Marriage Law. By this decree, citizen Aiden Says is designated as the spouse of princesses Celine Nora and... The coffee cup of Consul Aiden's Tuan grandchildren froze in the middle. The scalding liquid that sloshed over the rim burned his hand, barely reaching his lips, saw the consul tilt toward him, his cheeks turning chalky. "Congratulations, son-in-law!" The blue-skinned woman burst out of the barrier as commotion broke out. Even under her ceremonial clothing, muscles were apparent, and they spat furiously on the floor, while the other 2 have varied facial traits and violet skin, exchanged startled looks, declaring that the AI had finished the process. Cohabitation between a judge and a spouse registered in all systems must start within 24 A's. The barrier lifted. The 3 aliens, including Aiden, remained still for hours. With long silver hair that seemed to hover about them, princesses stepped forward as though they were flanked by underwater guards who urged them to approach him, saying, "There must be some." "I didn't sign up for this," Aiden replied, turning to face the consul. He averted his eyes and said, "The treaty's compatibility has been determined by algorithms, is fulfilled. Which pact is the one that keeps the consul from experiencing interplanetary conflict?" "Please just make this work," he said in a barely audible whisper, turning and rushed off, sir. Before Aiden could reply, a security drone hovered close by. "Please, guide your new spouses to your registered residence," by Aiden's shoulder. With a gentle hydraulic hiss, Aiden's apartment door slid open instantly. His new family status was automatically granted by the biometric scanner. The blue-skinned people dwell here with access to his 3 surprise spouses. If he had heard right, Woman Tuan twisted her lip in distaste and withdrew. A little gadget that scanned Aiden's entire body with a laser grid, asking him, "What are you doing?" Tu Yan icily responded, "Demand threat assessment. Poor muscular density. You will probably die soon due to your rudimentary cerebral architecture." "Aye." She clicked her tongue, revealing teeth that appeared to one of the violet-skinned women. Nora murmured, "Don't mind her," as she sat there, a little sharper than human ones, herself on his kitchen counter, purposefully crossing her legs, exposing a slit in her ceremonial robe. I can think of better methods to get to know Aiden than with that light that shined dimly in his apartment. Took a step back and said, "I don't know what's going on, but I didn't agree to marry anyone, much less 3 princesses. Is it even real?" The 3rd woman, Celine, responded. "Oh, it's very real." She had remained in the foyer, unlike her sisters, and her eyes were as silver as hair, looked about the flat as realistically and analytically as it's intriguing that the encrypted neural interface you're using is coded in an old Gianni dialect that most people can't understand, even speak our contemporary language, let alone become proficient in the dead variants. His illicit neurological modifications were intended to be imperceptible while he froze. Fortunately, Seelin's eyes narrowed, indicating that the quantum flow is devoid of coincidences. Earthman Aiden noticed his image reflected in his refrigerator's mirror. For a brief moment, he saw a glitch in the image that was following his movements. "Transfer back to our grandfather right away." "Which is okay with me," Aiden said. He moved to his communication terminal and pressed his palm against the screen, but it flashed red instead of lighting up, and the user didn't recognize the Aiden frowned and tried. "System announced, please contact network administration. This terminal has been locked for security reasons, and access has been prohibited once more." When Aiden took out his personal communicator, the screen showed just one message account. "The hell," he mumbled. "Network connectivity has been stopped, and you are vanishing from the digital matrix." Selin saw an intriguing Aiden by his side abruptly, and he tested the door, refused to move, so he tried turning on the food synthesizer, but it also stayed inactive, and his smart home system stopped working. As she slipped down the counter, Nora remarked, "Great," acknowledging him as a resident. "Grandfather has really excelled himself this time, and his new husband is an outlaw." "This isn't my doing," Aiden uttered, but he was aware that someone influential desired him, off the grid, and they had trapped him with this strange marital arrangement. Tuan went to the window and looked out. "Military-grade surveillance drones are watching us. What did you do to enrage them?" Seelin inquired about the order of resets in a sincere manner. As the order of resets was repeated, Aiden's head shot up, saying, "Suddenly, they rebooted the Quadrant's most dreaded enforcement agency. Troublesome people removed them from the world, both online and offline." For Aiden grinned and said, "For the first time since this ordeal started, there is finally some peace. And peaceful without all those alerts." The three women gazed at him with different looks of unbelief. "You're either crazy or Tuan started," but was cut off by a "Get down," Aiden yelled, leaping across the room to the high-pitched wail coming from outside. "Confront Seelin, right as Noah," shouted, as a laser bolt blazed into the area where her head had been. Yan ducked behind the counter, but she took a tiny weapon out of her ceremonial robes and said, "No!" Aiden ordered. His abruptly authoritative tone caused even Tuan to pause and remain inside. He took what looked to be an antique walking stick from a fancy stand at the entryway. "Because you're my wives, I suppose I'll have to keep you safe before any of them can react." 3 battle drones hovered outside their balcony while Aiden was there. A sniper was stationed atop a nearby flat with guns pointed at it. The red aiming laser is visible against the evening sky from the nearby rooftop. What followed transpired so fast that the princesses could hardly keep up with Aiden as he sprang with unnatural speed. His cane appears to be far away as he lands on the closest drone over the balcony railing, more than it seemed to have penetrated the central processing unit of the computer as it had jumped to the next one, utilizing its momentum to propel himself after it sparked and dropped. Within seconds of the third, all 3 drones were lying on the ground, smoldering. Below, Aiden faced the sniper from the balcony of the building next door. The princesses hurried to their balcony to witness the man's weapon clatter to the ground as Aiden got closer. Shock at Aiden's nonchalant use of violence against the would-be killer. The sniper's arm bowed at an odd angle, but he didn't kill the man. Finally, Aiden picked up the dropped communicator after whispering something in his ear. He spoke into it. "Listen carefully," his voice plainly audible over the princess's ignore, the distance. "But tell your superiors that the next warning will come in the form of amputation. You tread." He returned the communicator to the quivering sniper and started to walk away. Leaping gracefully and precisely across the space between buildings to land on his own balcony, the princesses gazed at him in disbelief as his face was splattered with blood. leather jacket, but he appeared totally unconcerned as he returned to the apartment. They saw that the humorous t-shirt that was exposed underneath his unzipped jacket said, "Not a morning person." Selin noticed that her critical tone did not conceal the fact that she was bleeding. Incredulous, Aiden cleaned his face without spilling my blood. "Who are you?" Tuan said. Weary respect replaced the previous contempt. "He was just a man who didn't ask to be," married Aiden responded, taking off his jacket smeared with blood. "But apparently, why would the Order of Resets want you dead when that's the least of our issues?" Inching closer to scrutinize him with renewed interest, Nora asked. "They don't." Aiden clarified that they want me dead and went to the kitchen to wash his hands. Why would they want that cell impressed, and why was I erased? Aiden used a towel to dry his hands before turning to greet his 3 new wives, who were most likely the same explanation for why your grandfather was so keen to remove you from Yan's hand. "How could you?" She flew to her sword once again. "Oh, come on," Aiden interrupted. "You believe that the consul's marriage of his 3 granddaughters to a stranger he couldn't wait to meet is a coincidence. Get rid of you." "That's not true," Nora objected, but her tone lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Aiden asked. "Tell me, ladies, how you offended someone so strong that your own grandfather had to sacrifice you to." 3 women looked at each other, and they were silently communicating with each other. Selin grudgingly acknowledged that he might have insulted someone, the current head of the Order. Tuan tightened her jaw, a pitiful man with unreasonable expectations of grandeur. And now we're weed to a pitiful human being. Nora let out a dramatic sigh. Leaning on the counter, Aiden studied your marriage customs and his grandfather's answer to everything. What happens to your standing in Selin's eyes when you marry someone who is not of your species? Expanded somewhat. We lose our political standing and join the husband's family. Conveniently, Aiden pointed out that your grandfather has influence in the Shiani court. He only loses 3 grandkids, whom he was probably not particularly connected to anyhow, but he is off-world and out of trouble. You don't know anything about our family, yet even though Tuan lost her temper, there was pain underneath it. I know enough about Aiden's response. Voice suddenly becoming softer. I understand what it's like to be disposable for a brief. The flat was silent, save for the faint sounds of the city outside. Nora finally inquired, "What's going on now? We're stuck in this apartment with a man who reportedly uses a stick to destroy military drones, while one of the most potent groups in Aiden stepped to the window and peered out at the galaxy, which wants us all dead. As the sky grows darker, we must find out how to stay alive at night because, believe me..." He glanced back to the princesses, his eyes gleaming strangely in the actual trouble hasn't even begun yet, as if on cue the whole time, and the low light was only the welcome party. The building trembled as the skyline was illuminated by a far-off explosion, and the apartment's lights flickered before going out. Aiden whispered, "And here they come," as he reached for his cane. The 3 silver-haired women approached one another in the sudden darkness, their brilliant skin offering the only lighting. "Stay behind me," Aiden said, his tone gradually becoming more intense, more authoritative. "And keep in mind that you married into this for whatever comes next. Better or worse," the princesses looked at each other in the shadows, had appeared to be a punishment for marrying off to an apparently normal person, but it was quickly changing into something far more intricate and hazardous. As the blast had cut off electricity, Aiden moved through the darkness with surprisingly little difficulty throughout the entire block. "Stay close," he told them, his shadow barely discernible against the emergency lights that flickered in the hallway. Princess said in a low, authoritative voice, "Where are we exactly?" Yan scoffed. "Your entire home has been compromised, and you have been wiped Selin's analytical mind, which was already analyzing their few choices. We are unable to buy products we don't need and obtain transportation," Aiden responded, halting at a door 3 stories below his apartment and pressing his knuckles to the metal surface in a particular pattern. The door instantly slid open to expose She was a small, attractive woman who couldn't have been taller than 5 feet. But in some way, she filled the doorway, and when she saw Aiden, her eyes widened. "Sir," she said instantly, lowering herself into a half bow. "I wasn't." She paused, expecting you to, and saw the 3 silver-haired extraterrestrial women behind. Mira," Aiden remarked nonchalantly, as though they weren't experiencing a problem. "We need food and housing, and right now, my place is a little precarious." "Naturally, sir," I stood aside without hesitation. "Would you all kindly join in the princess exchange?" Cautious looks, but it was unexpected that I followed Aiden into Mira's flat. Modern technology is evident despite the roomy, minimalistic appearance. As Sonora murmured to Aiden, he arched an eyebrow, but Aiden ignored that my question is directed to Mira, who has disabled my digital access codes. Mira's eyes furrowed in response to the erasing etiquette. "Who did you enrage?" "Time, presumably the order of resets," he responded, settling into a cozy chair as if he owned the space. Mira's poise momentarily wavered. "See, and these are my wives," Aiden remarked ironically. "It's been an eventful day, so I'll make some dinner." Mira claimed she was feeling better fast and proceeded to her moves in the kitchen are precise and efficient. "Will you need anything more, sir?" "Just some quiet for the time being. After Mira has moved out, I'll deal with the digital roadblock." Tu-Yan drew closer, her voice brimming with mistrust, out of earshot. "Just a neighbor who calls you sir and jumps to attention," said Aiden, the neighbor. Seelin noticed an interested Aiden leaning back and extending his arms. "When you knocked, what can I say about his head? I'm a well-respected member of the community, Nora. You sound like a chiming crystal when you laugh, but you're not what?" "You seem to be one of the few among us," Aiden retorted, later locking eyes with her. When they got back to Aiden's apartment, that evening the electricity was back on, but the majority of the systems were still down because with Mira's assistance, they had obtained enough supplies to last him until his digital deletion. "Home sweet home," Aiden whispered as they dropped their supplies after a few days. On what's left of the kitchen counter, the flat had been partially destroyed in the assault but still livable, with scorch marks adorning one, the balcony door, and the wall hung at a strange angle, asking, "How long do we have before they come back?" Seelin asked, already examining the apartment's weaknesses. "A few hours at least," Aiden said. "They'll get back together and figure out what went wrong with Tuan," said, "and then they'll come with greater force." This was their first try. Bitterly, most likely. Nora followed her as she wandered the flat, touching different objects with fingertips. "So this is how humans live. Quaint. What did you anticipate? A palace?" After taking off his leather jacket and hanging it up, Aiden asked, "Something less crude," she acknowledged near the door. "Though perhaps it has a certain allure. As night grew more complex, the issue of sleeping plans had to be made. Therefore, I'll accept the couch he offered already," Nora remarked, amassing a blanket of gibberish, her voice fading to a sensual purr. "There is definitely space for all of us now that we are married, right?" Yan rolled. "She always has the diplomat sister's eyes, so I'm just being realistic, Nora. Protected, even though her cunning smile implied otherwise." Tuan said, "I'll stand watch. Someone needs to stay vigilant." Aiden shrugged and retreated over the next few days. His bedroom developed an uncomfortable routine. Princesses used to opulent and servant lifestyles found it difficult to adjust to their new situation. Aiden appeared to be almost amused by their challenges on the third morning. Seelin found an old gadget in a storage cupboard and, intrigued, turned it on. The massage automaton, a remnant from at least 30 years ago, appeared out of nowhere. Its mechanized arms reached out to her, asking, "What is this primitive?" She started before the device embraced her and started its pre-programmed wife Selin, yelled as the computer said, "Signature detected," in a tiny voice, "Beginning relaxation protocol." In order to help her remove this item off of me, the massager started working on her shoulders. With his coffee cup in hand, Aiden leaned against the doorway frame. Edgar Seelin gasped when the machine struck a particularly tense spot, as you can. See? See my massage bot wedding present from a former partner? His mouth appears to be quivering with laughter. To like you, stop it. I'm not sure. You seem to be having fun. Taunted without attempting to assist the massager in carrying out its function. Seelin sensed her mechanical hands were extremely dexterous for her. Resistance decreased as her muscles' tightness subsided. Oh, she sighed. Half closing, silver eyes, Aiden observed. That's actually quite pleasant. His gaze remained unreadable for a while longer before he softly withdrew. Nora shocked everyone that night by making dinner without using the ingredients. Aiden's digital eraser caused the synthesizer to go offline, but in reality, preparing food, with uncooked items that she had mysteriously acquired. What is this? Tuan demanded, suspiciously examining the sizzling platters of food, Nora said plainly. Candles are placed around the table, and hand-prepared food is an ancient art, form on our planet, and it seems that it's here too. Aiden gazed at the spread, with sincere astonishment. Where did you learn to cook? Nora grinned enigmatically. Candlelight was used to serve the lunch, and the statement was, "There's much you don't know about us, Earthmen," establishing a closeness that neither of them had expected. And Noah had prepared for the event, and her dress was lowered sufficiently to display the glowing designs that swirling over her violet skin. This is Aiden. She started to taste something. Strange dish. Delicious, Seelin concluded for him reluctantly, similarly startled. Nodding in agreement, Nora displayed a tiny talent, but her eyes were bright. With delight at their response to our world, cooking by hand is regarded as a lost art that only academics and historians are interested in. Why Aiden said, "Did you bother?" Nora's gaze met his directly across the tension in the room from the flickering candlelight. Perhaps I wanted to show that not everything old is obsolete. Changed into something quite different later that evening, and when Aiden woke up, he discovered too unlike her sisters. Yan did not pretend that she was sleeping in his bed. She was fully nude as she lay on top of the covers, her blue skin glowing dimly, in as she would say. The darkness made her position tactically battle-ready. Allowing Aiden quietly walked out of the room, but her voice made it clear that she would intervene at the first sign of trouble. She halted him and questioned directly, her eyes unblinking. "Why haven't you touched any of us? What makes you think I want to have your pupils dilate when you look?" he asked, pausing. When Seelin speaks in the old language, your breathing quickens near Nora's legs, and you turn away from straight when I'm close. She opened one eye, displaying the basic physiological reactions. "Why are you in my bed?" Scientific curiosity Twansat. "You can't hide them. Among my people, warriors frequently mate with someone who isn't self-conscious about being naked. It sharpens the senses before conflict. Isn't that always the case?" Aiden retorted, looked at her for a while, and then turned away, saying, "Go sleep, princess." In the days that followed, a peculiar intimacy formed between the. In private times, the four of them started to get to know one another better. Seelin found out about Aiden's understanding the archaic Shiani tongue extended beyond simple encryption techniques. One evening, she saw him reading from a real book, a rarity in and of itself, written in the dead language. Her pronunciation is perfect, and she was quite amazed at how a human came to. "I had a terrific teacher who helped me learn our original language." Aiden closed the book. She briefly saw a glimpse of something ancient behind them as his gaze locked with hers. Nora persisted in her attempts at seduction, each more complex than the last, since she recognized the importance of history. Last, but not least, she adapted ancient Siani courtship customs to their, despite having few resources. Her efforts were obvious and strangely moving after one every intricate performance that included a dance that left her beaming and out of breath. Aiden eventually inquired, "Why are you trying so hard?" Nora briefly stopped putting on her sultry, Act since you're the first man who hasn't fallen at my feet yet, which is wonderful. Tuan, in the meantime, watched Aiden with increasing admiration for his strategic thinking and composure in the face of peril. Considering his fighting prowess, which is a quality that her warrior caste values, she started participating in his morning training sessions, practicing ancient martial forms with their bodies moving in unison. One morning following an especially intense workout, she remarked, "You fight like a Jiani shadow guard." Is that a compliment? When questioned if it was impossible to remove perspiration, she responded with the methods are kept under wraps and taught exclusively to those descended from warriors. Aiden simply grinned on the seventh day. 3 people wearing dark cloaks appeared outside the flat, shattering the relative calm, constructing elite combatants from the Order of Resets, with their faces hidden. Baituan first noticed them from the balcony, where it was dark even in the middle of the day. She declared that "they're here," her hand immediately reaching for her weapon. Casually started putting on his boots after taking a quick look outside. "They've come," when Seelin asked, "Excellent." Aiden's cheeks paled uncomfortably. Casually tell the females, "You can't go, but I'll be back soon." Nora objected, "There are 3 of them out there alone, and they're elite fighters." I saw that Aiden stated dryly that we ought to fight together, but Tuan maintained that we shouldn't. Aiden said, "You stay here, I'll handle this." But he left without saying anything. The princesses hurried to the balcony to witness Aiden approach the 3 before they could continue their argument. "You have 10 seconds to explain why I shouldn't tear your heads off," said the shrouded people on the street below. His voice could be heard clearly in the calm air as he said, "I was having a terrible..." "You interrupted an interesting date with 3 beautiful women," the leader said, laughing with a grinding sound. The subsequent events unfolded so quickly that even 2 Yans trained as Aiden ran like lightning. Warrior Eyes could hardly keep up, dropping the first. The second combatant lifted his weapon, and it was crushed between Aiden's fingers after he casually swept his leg. Before striking the victim with a deadly blow, the third managed to fire a shot that Aiden appeared to just evade, man's chest that caused him to gasp on the floor. All 3 of them perished. "Now," Aiden stated calmly as he stood over them, "anyone got a light?" The leader, now visibly frightened, held out an igniter in a shaky palm. With composure, Aiden took a cigarette from behind his ear, lit it, and turned to leave, trailing smoke as casually as though he had just gone outside to get some fresh air. When Aiden came back, the princesses fled the balcony in a state of startled silence. "How did you?" Nora said, as they gazed at him with fresh eyes. "Negotiate," Aiden said. As he drew on his cigarette, he said, "I can be very persuasive." Something changed between them that evening, and the barriers of resistance fell down as what started as Nora's sultry approaches intensified into passion as Selin's. The dance of desire was no longer aided by intellect and Tuan's raw force, keeping back from meeting each of them where they matched Selin's idea. Questions that delved deeply into Tuan's strength and Nora's sensuality with equal vigor. Hours later, when they lay intertwined in a complicated position, with his own silver hair and limb arrangement, Selin broke the stillness, saying, "You should know," she said, "the truth about why we're here." Aiden supported himself on, "Our grandfather didn't marry us," she said, one elbow observing her face in the low light. "In our culture, when granddaughters marry outside of our species, they become a member of the..." Aiden noted that the husband's family no longer had any political clout in our initial home. Grimly nodded. The commander of the Order of Resets had shown interest in Nora put tracing lines on Aiden's chest, which might have upset him. "Seriously, grandfather feared retaliation against our entire house," Selin said, outlined, "so he married us as the quickest way to eliminate us from the equation." "You to a random person." Aiden came to the conclusion that it wasn't so random, Tuan stated. Aiden's face showed only a ghost of a smile when he was closely examined. "No," he said, Not so random at all. Dawn toyed at the edges of his mouth, broke over the city skyline, illuminating Aiden's flat with lengthy shadows, held a coffee cup while standing at the window, observing the street below with a narrowed, whispered, "They're coming!" And the three princesses stepped forward to join him. During their week together, they had mastered the art of synchronicity, moving around one another with ease, grace. "How many?" "All of them," Tuan said, already grabbing her weapon. Seelin scowled and examined the patterns of Aiden's response, while taking a sip of his coffee. Even for the order that military drones hovered at, movement below that is excessive. Strategically placed mercenaries with unmarked combat gear around the building elite. Assassins positioned themselves at every exit wearing the recognizable black. The inner circle of the Order's cloaks crept across rooftops, with a dazzling hover in the middle. As the vehicle gently lowered to the ground, its doors opened to show a tool. Nora whispered to her, "The leader himself," a figure dressed in ceremonial garb. Aiden said, "I didn't think he'd come personally. Violet skin that pales to lavender, with a gentle click. I hoped he would drain his coffee and put the cup down." All three princesses turned to face him because of something in his tone. His expression was neutral, but his eyes had a, "You knew this was coming," Seelin said, of the perilous glimmer they had not before noticed. Aiden grinned thinly as he saw her analytical mind, making connections between the dots that had been dispersed before her all along. "Let's assume I expected it. What's the strategy?" Tuan insisted on kicking her warrior impulses. Aiden went to the utility closet across the room and came out with. The princesses gazed at him incredulously. "That's your weapon?" An ordinary mop? Unable to conceal her surprise, Nora inquired. "A cleaning tool." "It'll do," Aiden said. A threatening voice bellowed in response as he casually tested its weight in his hands, as directed by the Supreme Reset. "Council, you and your alien can communicate with each other using the building's communication system, Aiden K's. Consorts suffer the penalty of instant erasure, capitulation, and death. Will not cause any pain." Aiden sighed deeply, constantly acting so dramatic that we are unable to combat all of Seelin calculated their slim chances and reasoned that there must be more than a, "We don't have the leader's increased talents, the drones, or the 100 fighters, down there." As he moved toward the door, Aiden murmured, "I have to fight all of them." How Aiden paused his hand and mocked, "Do you propose to reach him through his army?" He stepped on the doorknob and said, "I'm going to walk without further explanation." The princesses exchanged startled looks before hurrying into the hallway. Nora yelled after him, "This is suicide," and grabbed his arm, saying, "At least take an appropriate weapon." Aiden gently released her hold, saying, "Remain here if you want," or he strode toward the elevator and the mop, saying, "Come watch either way. This ends today." After a brief delay, the princesses followed him outside in the morning, resting lightly against his shoulder. The Order troops had established a cordon around the structure, with firearms trained on the. The leader was waiting at the entrance in the middle. His face hidden by an elaborate Aiden came out by himself, with the mop still in a mask that reflected the morning sun. Slung over his shoulder, a wave of bewilderment swept through the gathered soldiers, followed by sporadic giggling. What we haven't understood is that the leader's enhanced voice bellowed at a person with AAs if having a morning stroll. Cleaning tool, Aiden kept moving forward without hurry. Red spots clustered on the drone's target systems as they strolled. One of the top-tier assassins stepped forward as his chest stopped there. I screamed, "Stop the assassin!" But Aiden disregarded him and kept walking casually. Almost too quickly to follow, Aiden raised his weapon and swung the mop. The assassin's weapon broke into pieces, and he struck the man in the chest with a second blow, sending him falling backward. In three of his fellows, the laughter abruptly stopped. "Fire!" The leader roared as all of the drones and soldiers fired at once. The air was flooded with energy bolts. The princesses screamed from the doorway, convinced that Aiden would be destroyed. But Aiden, when the mop moved like liquid lightning, it became an extension of himself. Bolts that were deflected whirled through holes in the attack pattern and avoided beams. He shouldn't have been there because he destroyed guns with every mop swing. Drones, the bodies of incapacitated assailants, and malfunctioning equipment started to litter the area around him as he made his way inexorably toward the leader, asking, "Who is he?" Nora muttered. Aruk said, "I don't know," to which Seelin said in a similarly quiet voice, "But I don't think. He's not really human." Tuan observed such motions with expert judgment, their traditional fighting techniques, but carried out with unfathomable speed and accuracy. As Aiden got closer to the center of the battle, he realized that an outsider shouldn't even be familiar with those techniques, much less be able to master them. Chaos, a particularly large drone dropped, launching a hail of would have destroyed a tiny structure. Aiden leaped to unthinkable heights and landed on the drone's surface and used the falling machine as a means to drive the mop's end directly through its central processor platform. He hurled himself straight at the leader, who was no longer arrogant, pulled out his ceremonial sword, which is said to be able to sever dimensional barriers, and slashed Aiden. Aiden swerved with the mop handle, which ought to have been cut off right away by the instead. The edge of the sword skittered off in a shower of dimensional blades. Makes it hard for the leader's masked face to display shock. Impossible! Aiden retaliated, hitting with accuracy. Just it's unlikely that their fight intensified, turning into a haze of movement too fast for regular eyes to follow, because they couldn't target Aiden without endangering their leader in the middle of the battle. The remaining forces paused their fire. Aiden's jacket ripped off, exposing his torso across his back. Displayed a massive tattoo of a dragon, its scales moving delicately with his. Its eyes glowed with inner fire, and a startled murmur echoed through. Some warriors fell to their knees when the gathered forces' guns were lowered. One of the top assassins muttered, "It's him, the founder." The leader, his masked face turned toward the growing wave of terror and awareness as he paused in mid-strike, saying, "No conceivable. To keep the lesser levels in line, the founder is a fiction." Aiden stopped his. The dragon tattoo glowed with ethereal force as the attack stood erect, eyeballs moving over his skin on their own as though the monster were alive. "Not Amith," Aiden murmured, his voice echoing over the abruptly quiet battlefield. "Simply retired." The leader stumbled back. "No, the founder couldn't have vanished 50. I got bored years ago." Aiden shrugged and chose to take a step back to see what would his expression hardened as a result of my invention. "And I've been let down by Aiden," disarmed the leader with a smooth stroke, causing the dimensional blade to clatter. The leader collapsed on his knees across the pavement and pleaded, "Please." Suddenly modest and human, no longer exaggerated. "I didn't know I never would have targeted Consul Zoe's granddaughters. If you had known that they were in my custody, Aiden would have finished for him. Most likely not, but you did. And to make matters worse, you tainted the order, changing it from its original aim," the leader inquired. And there was obvious bewilderment. Even Aiden stated simply that the order was intended to be the equilibrium beneath his mask, opposing force to digital immortality as both people and aliens submitted their as their lives became more conscious. The networks became inundated with something that was resets were necessary to keep things in balance, and they weren't supposed to be frightening. Organization was intended to be a natural force, similar to death, in a world where people were attempting to escape it. All of the Order's remaining soldiers had fallen to their knees, their weapons abandoned. "Stand up," Aiden ordered the leader. As the three princesses watched in amazement from the building's entryway, "Take off your mask and reveal to them who has brought them into disgrace." With shaking hands, when the commander took off his elaborate mask, a startlingly youthful face twisted, with Aiden said, "Kane Mercer," loud enough for everyone to hear, "because of ambition and fear. You killed your way to leadership, former low-level reset technician. How many members of the Genuine Council perished at your hands?" The merchant's face twisted, were feeble and unwilling to fully utilize the authority of the Order. "It was about necessary endings, not power," Aiden clarified icily. He turned to face the kneeling warriors and saw that it was clean slates, second chances. A tiny person surged through the crowd, never intending to evoke fear. "Sir," said Aiden's neighbor, who was now wearing a spotless business suit, "everything has been prepared as you instructed the network," he said, bowing slightly, "has been cleared of corruption, the outdated procedures have been restored, and the fraudulent reset records. Thank you, Mira." Aiden bowed, "And the council members that made it through Mercer's purge have been found and are waiting for your..." When the Commander Mercer realized you had been plotting, his eyes widened. "This entire time since I discovered that you were pursuing defenseless women in order to fulfill your..." "Yes," Aiden acknowledged. "The marriage was an unforeseen issue. You planned the union." Celine stepped forward from the entrance and inquired. Aiden turned to face the other princesses who had followed her, but not precisely when I added myself to the interplanetary database as a possible match after learning of Mercer's interest in you. Your grandfather was so desperate that he took the first qualified applicant." Nora laughed abruptly, and I didn't anticipate the compatibility rating to be that thorough. I mean, this wasn't simply a political agreement. The system actually matched us. Aiden added, "The algorithm doesn't lie," with a faint smile. "But I had intended only to keep you safe until Mercer could be taken out." "Not really, yes, Aiden, marry us." Tuan gave her a somewhat softer expression, cleared his throat, and made plans to switch merchants after noticing Aiden's distracted focus, and lunged. Aiden flung the mop handle at a dropped weapon before he could get to it, struck Mercer's temple with surgical accuracy, knocking him out. As Mercer was being carried into custody, Aiden told the closest soldiers that he would be subject to the council's decision. The princesses moved aside and continued to study Aiden. Celine added, "Fresh knowledge that you were the renowned creator of the Order of Resets. A term I've never really understood wanted Aiden to acknowledge that I had set up the sequence 200 years prior. When immortality first became a possibility, someone had to make sure that unlimited life came with the right conditions. Repercussions for deeds. Yet you see that Nora pointed to his comparatively. Aiden clarified that youthful appearance changes do not equate to immortality, but rather to increased durability. I didn't want to control my invention forever. Instead, I wanted to see what happened to it." Tuan saw Aiden grimace for a brief moment as he said, "Here you are ruling again. Sufficient to return to the initial goal." Mira came back with the tablet in hand. "The council asked you to come, sir," and she looked at the princesses. "Congratulate them on your marriage and let them know you'll be there soon." Following Mira's departure, Aiden told the princesses, "I owe you." Nora begged in an arched voice for an explanation and an apology for sparing our lives. He clarified, "I never intended to actually go through with the deception." "And now," Celine said straight to Aiden, "the marriage was intended to be a temporary measure to keep you safe. Now I find myself reluctant to annul it." A person looked at each of them individually. "Good, because I've grown rather fond of you," said Nora with a sincere smile. "You Earthman." "As have I," Celine acknowledged, in spite of the difficulties. Yan crossed her arms. "You're a good friend, and your fighting abilities are sufficient assistance, good praise, and a proper wedding 3 months later." In the big hall of the Order's headquarters, Aiden and the 3 princesses were united in a ceremony. From Earth and the Chiani system, as well as the recently reorganized council, attended. The actual Order had changed and was no longer a terrorist group, going back to its original goal of preserving equilibrium in a world where digital life threatened to supplant natural reality. Aiden created a new code that allows people to exist both inside and outside of the digital network, with unambiguous penalties for anybody who misused either realm in their private rooms. Following the ritual, Aiden was encircled by his 3 wives, each of whom was now distinct, truly special to him in several ways. "I never expected this," he acknowledged, "as I stepped back into the light to stop a tyrant and somehow gained a family." "The universe," they lounged together, "has an odd sense of humor," Celine noted, referring to Nora's family. Aiden arched an eyebrow and said, "We've sent an invitation to grandfather for dinner next week." "Has he replied?" "He's coming," Tuan said. despite what his message said. He's a little nervous about properly meeting his new grandson-in-law. As well as he married you off to the most dangerous man in the quadrant. Lucky us, Aidan laughed. Should be, Nora murmured. As life settled into a new normal, Aidan assigned the majority of Theoda's operations to the Council, keeping merely the power to supervise, and his wives alternate between the Shiani system and constructing Earth. Bridges between worlds that had previously been suspicious of one another. Their flat was remodeled and enlarged to make room for their peculiar family. One morning as Aidan was making coffee, in the ceiling questioned, "What's that?" when Mira put a new sign on their door in the kitchen. Mira took a step back and looked over her shoulder, exposing the inscription, "Here." There is a person who is best left alone, especially when he is in a bathrobe. As he poured 4 cups of coffee, Aidan grinned inside because he could feel the delivery of a telegram from the consul. Likely another anxious question. The old man had been gnawing his nails down to the quick in anticipation of next week's dinner. The dragon tattoo on Aidan's back has changed a little ever since he discovered who his granddaughter's spouse really was. After the founder spent millennia alone, its eyes were blinking contentedly. Discovered that he was lacking a family, and woe betide everyone who threatened it, the reset order had been put back to its original intent, and the renowned founder of Aidan K had at last discovered a fresh way to start over. Starting with 3 princesses with grey hair who had turned out to be his ideal mate, following Aidan Kaiser's 5 years before the union that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. The immensity of space stretched before me as I stood on the viewing deck of an abandoned space station on the outer rim. His reflection in the strengthened glass revealed a figure who had innumerable stars piercing the darkness. He seemed to be in his mid-30s, but he was actually millennia old. According to the reports you asked for, sir, Mira appeared silently next to Aidan, grabbed the neural data chip without checking to see if the order had changed. Mira stated that her voice was clinically exact under Kane Mercer's supervision, which was a substantial departure from the initial procedures. Influence. They have shifted from balanced regulation to political manipulation, extortion, and assassination. Instead of authorized resets, fear now accounts for the majority of income streams. Aidan's jaw stiffened. Casualties. In the last 3 years, 17 council members have been removed, and 46 regional directors were replaced with 800% more civilian erasers who were Mercer loyalists, most without. The dragon tattoo on Aidan's back awoke with glowing eyes and the appropriate authorization. He had established the order during humanity's first digital growth, just barely visible beneath his shirt. Imagine when individuals started prolonging their lives eternally by uploading their consciousness. Someone had to make sure that wealthy people were still held accountable for their actions, and powerful were unable to simply erase their digital identities if they committed crimes. "How did we miss this?" he said softly, but Mira's poise remained unflinching. "You directed little oversight while you were retired, sir, and corruption developed gradually after that." Exponentially, after Mercer gained power, Aidan eventually looked at his helper. Most people simply saw a small, attractive woman in Mira, his first and most devoted creation. Few people realized she was a hybrid, being that combined elements of quantum AI and synthetic organisms, contained within a structure that merged the finest aspects of mechanical and organic engineering. She had a mind that processed information more quickly than most and was stronger than 20 battle droids. 100 years ago, he built supercomputers as his watchers and sentinels. Mira Aidan, you have been my dependable confidant for generations. "Have I ever told you your origin story?" she asked, examining her face. "No, sir. Although you were aware of my powers when you programmed me, you were unaware of my creation aid." I smiled a little, but I was lonely since one man couldn't handle the weight of the order. I needed someone who would grasp the weight, even with my changes. He signaled that when I lost my perspective, there were centuries who could keep it. I utilized bits and pieces of my own consciousness together with the most sophisticated synthetic matrices of the era. You were not just an helper, but a friend made to endure beyond even my own Mira's expressions. Often, a little, a rare emotional outburst. But I've always known what I'm doing was more than enslavement, sir. But you still bowed and addressed me as sir, Aiden noted. Those around us find comfort in protocol, she replied plainly. And I respect what you built and what you stand for, because my difference is real and not pre-programmed. Aiden nodded and turned around. To the stars, a frontal encounter would lead the order to be cleansed. Yet, we require subtlety because of the chaos in the quadrant, Mercer recently demonstrated. Interest in the consul Mira's granddaughters, whose intelligence indicates he's intending to compel a marital partnership in order to obtain power among the Shiani diplomatic corps, Aiden thought. I've heard that they colourfully rebuffed his advances, and the oldest referred to him as a Mira, confirmed that parasitic grubs were eating on the remains of a once noble establishment. The slightest trace of laughter in her voice was necessary for the diplomatic situation. 3 mediators to settle a dispute started to take shape in Aiden's thoughts. He could access the Please generate a compatibility profile for me using the Interplanetary Marriage database, convincing enough to surpass Mercer, but not so flawless that it gives the impression that you plan to wed the princesses you have already. Asked Mira to interface with remote systems using I plan to safeguard her internal quantum link, Aiden explained. Naturally, Sir Mira said that marriage is only a legal shelter. Through her blunt expression implied that, in her 2 centuries of devotion, she had seen patterns, even in Aiden, and understood more than she revealed. Aiden lived in a tiny apartment 6 months prior to the wedding, which he was unable to observe, in the middle of the city, near enough to the power centers to keep an eye on things without being intrusive. Attention. He had meticulously planned events with delicate computerized breadcrumbs, which prompted Mercer to use targeted insults against the princesses to make sure. The console would look for a last-minute marriage solution, injecting the ideal compatibility, match into Themethod, but during his preparation, something unforeseen occurred, as Sir Mira reported one. I've finished the Shiani princesses' psychological profiles this evening, and Aiden inquired about going over security procedures on his old data console. One is totally cut off from core networks, yet they're amazing, Mira added, showcasing 3 holographic representations of Selin's competitors in analytical intelligence. With the majority of quantum computers, Noah's empathy is so high that she could have been a skilled diplomat, but for her disobedient disposition and Tuyan's fighting tests reveal reflexes that surpass even the improved baseline that Aiden examined the profiles with increasing awareness that they are more than merely political pawns. According to my investigation, they might be the 3 most remarkable, as Mira confirmed. Shiani is of their generation, which explains why Mercer is obsessed with things other than politics. Benefit that they stand for the intellectual and genetic capital he desires for the 4. The first time in decades, Aiden had a sincere want to learn more about them. Enjoyed the understated look she had on her face as her maker showed off his seldom saw humanity. So I figured you might inquire about it, sir, now. 5 months after, Aiden sat in the private garden of their expanded home after the showdown with Mercer and the return of order. The 3 princesses and his wives are suddenly real, and not just legal fiction. Relaxed close to their silver hair, which was shining in the afternoon sun. Selin, you never explained to us how Mira joined your service. Aiden grinned as she looked up from her quantum theory text. Been by my side virtually from the start of my first and finest creation, Mira, a hybrid entity, half-arched and exquisite eyebrow in creation. Aiden said that I made her 2 artificial intelligence systems, one synthetic and one organic. When the loneliness of eternity became unbearable ages ago, Yan paused in the middle of her battle form practice, explaining her. She could take all 3 of us in with her unfathomable strength and speed. I've been attempting to study her motions for months. Combat Aiden acknowledged that I might be involved as well, but we haven't tested that. Selin inquired, is that programmed? In reference to Theory and her loyalty, Aiden shook his head. I granted her total autonomy from the time of her formation to the end of her slavery. Why does she bow and address you as sir if her decision has been renewed every day for 200 years? For example, Nora pondered when I asked her that, and when Aidan answered, she remarked, I believe she finds comfort in the formality that protocol produces, which makes a framework for her life. The discussion halted when Mira herself showed up at the garden entrance saying, Sir, the console's shuttle has launched into orbit, and he will be there for dinner in about 40 minutes. Thank you, Mira. Nora stretched languidly. Poor, grandfather motionless, and nodded when she had left. I'm afraid you'll destroy him for proposing to us as sacrificed brides. Ironically, Selim went on to say that his last-ditch plan saved us all, handed us each other. Tuan added softly and unusually. Aidan gazed each of his 3 wives was exceptional in her own right, and served as a means to, and do you ever regret it being the end of someone who had been vital to his existence? The princesses looked at each other and communicated silently while chained to someone like me. We've talked about this between them, and Selin responded on their behalf. Locating a partner who could complement us both physically, emotionally, and intellectually seemed, statistically, it was hard to find someone who could compete with all 3 of us in our unique fields of expertise. Tuan said, acceptable in all parameters. But here you are. Nora grinned, agreed, which was her greatest compliment. Aidan felt the warmth of the dragon tattoo, a bioquantum construct that was both a weapon and a companion pressed against his flesh. I should tell you something, he added, referring to the final remnant of a creature from a dimension he had come across millennia before. With Selin's assistance, I was able to confirm that the 3 princesses looked at him. As anticipated, the compatibility algorithm that paired us contained more than just social and psychological factors. Selin nodded, her violet blush a rare sign of genetic compatibility. Nora gasped quietly. You mean yes? I had a suspicion about your cheeks after examining the hormonal changes in the 3 of us. Aidan verified that, based on Selin's analysis, all 3 of you are pregnant. Unconsciously, Tuan's hand created an unparalleled genetic mix, went to her stomach, warrior children, and Aidan remarked, human, Zini, and whatever I've evolved into throughout the ages, as well as traces of the 3 kids who will cross universes Selin, a quantum being bonded to my spine murmured wonder, in place of her customary detached analysis. The next generation of Nora noted that her eyes were filled with emotion as the founders stared at their wives. Now the mothers of his children, and felt a sense of hope for the future that he hadn't felt in generations. Samira, the abnormality we've been seeing has been halted once more at the entrance priority communication from the outside rim. Aidan's face became serious as he stood the dragon on his back once the monitoring had grown, clearly moving and, now show me the holographic screen that showed a tear in similar to the chasm between dimensions he had experienced when the dragon creature initially linked with him, E-time. The quantum signs are calling to you, Mira murmured softly to everyone. Align your dragon with your wife's Selin's embryonic patterns. Converge with him to study the display with professional attention. Point that the kids aren't just carrying on our legacy. They're serving a cosmic purpose. Aidan, there are always more secrets, whispered, as he felt the burden of his newfound obligation descend. To his right, Tu Yan moved into a warrior stance, imitating his whatever. Nora finished circling her hand through that rift, and we confronted it together. As the fissure pulsed on the holographic display, Aidan found his family. He examined the remarkable woman fate had destined for him, devoted Mira, who had remained at his side for millennia, and watched as his wife's fresh life grew, whatever came out of that level of dimensions, whatever new chapter was starting. He was Aidan Kai's future husband and father, and he was no longer the lone founder who would wander through eternity alone. The sequence of resets has been more the active protector of universal balance, cleaned, but there were more difficulties ahead that would need not only the founder, but the eyes of the dragon tattoo sparkled, and he discovered it in surprise with his entire family. Prepare my ship wonderfully, as though looking forward to that uncertain future with enthusiasm rather than fear. As for the accommodations for my family, it appears we have a fresh reset to supervise, possibly the greatest one yet. Yes, sir, Mira said, bowing her head, with a sincere grin that lit up her timeless face. The finish is in sight.